Okay, I think we can get started since we're now at Berkeley time. So, hi everybody. Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for coming today. If you weren't here for the first two speaker events, my name is Tara. I'm part of the team that works on the SCET Innovation Fellows Program, where you can complete a series of weekly challenges to get prizes and get points and win prizes from the SCET. And this semester, I'm running the Climate Challenge, where you can pick a climate or sustainability issue that you're interested in and come up with your own basic high-level solution for how to begin tackling that problem. If you've already signed up to take part in the Climate Challenge, that's awesome. But if not, I'm going to drop the link to register in the chat. And again, I'll drop it in at the end of the event. And this is a reminder that today is actually the last day to register for the challenge. I will be closing the registration tonight at 11:59 p.m. So if you haven't registered, please do so. Today is our third speaker event as part of the Climate Challenge, and we're so excited to welcome Trista Bridges from Breathe the Air, which shifts business strategies and models to become more sustainable. And without further ado, I will let Trista continue to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Tara. Hi, everyone. My name is Trista. I'm speaking to you today from Tokyo, which is where I live. I'm originally from the US, actually the East Coast, New Jersey. I lived many, many years in France, so I'm American and also have French nationality, and I moved here to Japan about 7 years ago. And as Tara mentioned, I work around the topic of sustainability. And so the way we're going to run today, I have several slides that I'm going to kind of walk you all through. I would very much like this session to be interactive, if at all possible. I will ask you probably at different points to kind of provide your point of view on Zoom and the reactions buttons. And I'll talk to you about when it's that. And at the end, we're going to do just a little bit of an exercise. So at that point, I would very much like for you to, you can do it now or do it later, turn your cameras on, take yourself off mute, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion and do that exercise. So hopefully that'll be a little interesting for people. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I run an organization called Breathe the Air that's based in Tokyo. And as Tara mentioned, what we do is we really try to work with organizations to help move them from sustainability ideas and sustainability, I could say, targets or objectives to actually doing something, okay? This is something that businesses are struggling with profoundly. And so, we'll talk a little bit about innovation a bit later on, but a lot of the change needs to happen as well around you could say what businesses do and how they operate, how they make decisions. And so that's what we try to help them do. Okay. Another thing that I do as well, I'm also on the sustainability committee for an organization, a company called EcoVadis, a startup that's based in France. You might want to check them out. They're very interesting. They have a lot of really good information around sustainability, and they work with data and ratings to try to understand and track what organizations are doing, which is also a big theme in sustainability. And then the last thing that I do is I'm an external ESG advisor for a venture capital fund, and I work with startups directly in helping them also be more sustainable. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the background first of how we kind of got to the point where we are today. I think now we probably would all say that this is something that's really very much in the media. It's very much on top of people's minds, but it has not always been that way. And there are some things that have happened over the last, I say 20 years or so, throughout most of your lifetime, that has really brought us to this moment. And I want to talk a little bit about these because this really provides the foundation of what we're going to talk about today. So many people may recall or may have heard about the 2008 crash. The 2008 crash, financial crash, was a pretty fundamental shift in terms of mindsets, in terms of business, because what it really did was it really broke the social contract in many ways between society and companies and government. So traditionally, what the agreement was basically that government would kind of handle a lot of the social issues and challenges, and then businesses would basically make profits and they would hire people and they would employ people. Over time, this shifted, okay? And so now we know, as we know today, that companies aren't necessarily kind of holding up their end of the bargain, neither are governments. And this was really a key point in time because what it did was kind of make society very angry. This was kind of the start of a lot of the things that we're dealing with today, politically, culturally, and also in the sustainability and environmental issue. Another thing that we've seen as well, we've seen that wage shares have been shrinking. This is from the EU, but this is shrinking kind of everywhere. So this wage to GDP gap that we're seeing is getting worse over time. Income gains, we hear a lot about, this disparity between the lower part of society and the upper 1% or 0.5%, whatever we want to call them. And this wage disparity or income disparity that is continuing to grow over time and is not improving. We also see millennials and now Gen Z as well, who are very much not, on the economic ladder as generations that came before. This has been very frustrating and very challenging for a lot of people, and is also really changing the mind shift of younger people and how they think about the world, society, and many issues. Out of this, we've had the next movement, which I'd say is the last 10 years or so, where we started to see Fridays for the Future, we started to see Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, and a lot of activism around climate. And so I show all this because what we're seeing is really a societal discontent. And usually things shift and change when there is a big societal discontent. And we're very much in that period of time. We also had in 2020, with the tragic death and murdering of George Floyd, we have the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which continues, and we're still continuing to see the fallout of that, but just more activism around social issues and understanding in society of the many of the disparities and challenges that we still face. On top of that, we had COVID, which really shifted in many ways, many things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And then now we're dealing with a war, right? So as you can tell, over the last 13 years or so, and I won't tell my age, but I have seen probably more upheaval in the last 13 years than I did in much of my lifetime. Awareness around environmental, social, and also we call them governance issues in companies has really basically become a really strategic issue for everyone, okay? And something else happened in 2015 in this period of time, and that was the SDGs. The SDGs, as you probably all know, these lovely, colorful goals that the UN set, we call these a game changer. And they're not so much a game changer in that they've really encouraged people to change significantly. But what they did do is they did two things. First of all, they really broadened the definition of what sustainability means. So if you look at this, what we see here, we see things like health, we see things like infrastructure and growth, we see things like circular economy and looking at our consumption patterns and also working together. So before, when we thought about sustainability, it was a very kind of narrow definition. It focused a little bit more around environmental concerns. And what we're seeing now is that all these things are really important in terms of building a society that functions. And they're all interconnected, right? It's very difficult to have climate action without economic growth. It's difficult to have climate action without people that are healthy or without fair and equal economies and society. So that's really the first thing. The second thing as well is that this really brought businesses into the discussion. This SDGs were not created at all for companies. They were created for countries. However, companies saw themselves in these, right? So if you work around kind of home development or home building, you might see that infrastructure is a really important SDG to focus on. If you're a healthcare company, you would look at SDG 3. And sometimes companies use this in a very cynical way and not always in an effective way. But what it did was it really kind of started the conversation, which was important, okay? But I think it's really important to stress that we have this 2030 goal, but we're way off track. And so there's been some studies that have been done that say basically, unless we accelerate our action, we're not going to actually achieve the SDGs until 2092. And obviously we know that that's unacceptable, right? We may not actually have a habitable planet in that period of time. So we need to think about what can we all do, and particularly the business community do, to move faster and to really actually take action onto the things that they've promised. So one thing that I would like to do, if we could do really quickly, and I don't know if I could even see it, I might have to kind of stop sharing for a second. But I would love to hear from you a little bit around whether you think that businesses can actually get to this point where they can actually operate in a sustainable manner. Do you actually believe it? And what I would love to do is if you could go to the reaction button and just click the check. I think if you do that, I can see your answer, or the thumbs up. That would be great. And if it's X, it's no, that's fine, no problem. But that would be great. So I just want to get your opinions on it. Okay, no. Great. I think it seems the consensus is yes. But I would love to hear from Ankita, if you don't mind. You said no. Can you tell me why you said no? I'm just curious your point of view.
Yeah, is just to make sure the question was, is sustainability and business as usual, like they can
Yeah.
happen together, basically?
Yes. So can we get to a world where the two can function together? Is it
Um,
achievable?
only if, in my opinion, it's only, I say no because we have to change like our definition of business as usual. So,
Yeah.
um, like say given like business as usual is how it is right now, then I would say no because like sustainability requires addressing like the overproduction and overconsumption nature of business as usual. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very good. And Priya, you said yes. Can you tell me why yes?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is actually kind of similar to Ankita's because I was thinking, yes, if we can change business as usual, and if we can also maybe have like a third party type of platform that could enforce businesses to uphold their goals and sustainability initiatives. So it's not just corporations putting words on a website.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I think that what you said, and we'll talk about that later on, is business model innovation. We talk a lot about innovation and technology, but we also have to kind of reimagine how businesses work and how they function. That's equally important. And I think it's very difficult as well to do. And I'll talk to you a little bit. We're going to continue through the presentation and we'll come on to some more exercises around this later. But I think this is a really important point that we'll come back to later on. But I do want to start with, what does a sustainable business model actually look like? Okay. And how do we actually get to this definition? So if we take a step back, one of the first things businesses did that kind of extended beyond the kind of profit maximizing objective, right, which was corporate philanthropy. And what happens is basically usually the founder or somebody senior in the company says, oh, I like children's issues, or oh, I like religious issues, or I like whatever issue. And they basically give money. Okay. They started to develop these things called foundations, and foundations oftentimes were the vehicle for corporate philanthropy. There were also a lot of tax benefits of being philanthropic as well. But this was really conditional upon the financial health of the company. Okay, so if the company didn't do well, no money was given. If the company did well, money was given. So that was kind of the first engagement of things that are kind of beyond business. Next, we had something called corporate social responsibility, or CSR, which is a term you may still use, although companies are moving away from this now. And it was really focused on what is the current state of the world that I'm seeing today? Is there something maybe we could do as a company to be a bit more responsible? It really was, in many ways, for many companies, a way of kind of communicating their values to policymakers, to governments, to thought leaders, and to influencing opinion. There's also a lot of communication in CSR as well. And also compliance was a really big area of focus, right? Laws started to be passed, and it was a way for people to kind of, organizations to kind of be a bit more focused, and be a bit more compliant. But now we have something called sustainable business, right? And some people even say sustainable business isn't far enough. It should be regenerative business, but we won't talk about that so much today. But sustainable business is different. Why? Because it's much more forward looking. It's looking at what is the impact of a business on the world. It aims to try to put profit, people, and planet on at least an equal plane. It looks at the entire value chain, right? Right from, if I'm making food, if I'm making, I don't know, a pancake maker, from the actual, wheat in the beginning and the grains through to what is in the box and what goes on the table. Everything that happens, can we make sure that this activity is sustainable from end to end? It really, business strategy and operations are the principal areas of focus. In the previous models, corporate responsibility, often it was investor relations or communications. Now we're talking actually about strategies and how we operate in our business model. So it's a big shift. It's viewed as a driver of growth, not a hindrance of growth. And the execution of responsibility really lies within all management, not just sustainability departments, okay? But, and this is basically the model that businesses that we talked about a little earlier will need to adopt to be able to kind of do some of the things that we've been talking about. And so as a reminder, business as usual really funds these two kind of first steps in this chain here. And business as usual actually is sustainable business. So that's what we want to kind of get to. That's our future in terms of where we want businesses to go. This is something that I developed, and actually I wrote a book called Leading Sustainably. And one of the things that we did in that book, I have a co-author that I wrote the book with, is we talked about what are the steps that businesses go to when they move to sustainable business models, right? And so there's 5 steps. These are pretty common sense, but they're pretty profound because many businesses are not actually very far along in this process. So what happens? We have first a base level understanding. Everybody kind of understands what's going on. We think sustainability is interesting. We maybe research a couple topics that are interesting for us and we focus on them. Then step 2 is the C level actually says, yeah, we think this is important. So the kind of the president, he or she or they decide that that's something that's important. They want their organization to focus on it, and they start making some initial choices, right? So they say, okay, these are the areas we're going to focus on. These are the areas we're going to measure, and they focus on that first. Then they do a couple things and they do a first few actions and wins. So this might be, you probably see in stores, you go to Zara or you go wherever and you see kind of a sustainable product. This is kind of that step, right? We're doing maybe in one product line or something, we're kind of doing something that's sustainable. But then it starts to become more integrated into the organization overall. So we start to see different departments kind of setting priorities and sharing. We saw more people within the organizations getting involved and having buy-in. And then when we get to the final step, we hope to get to this place where everything is integrated, where everything is aligned, where sustainability strategy really is the business strategy of the company, where they have actual action plans that kind of really lay out what are we delivering and when and who's responsible. There's a common set of values across the business. We have KPIs that are embedded and in terms of employees being reviewed. This is something that's really important as well. And then we have technology and processes in place so we can track these things over time. However, when we did our research for the book, we spoke with about 100 thought leaders around the world, lots of big companies, lots of startups. So companies even like Coca-Cola or companies like HSBC. We also talked with venture capital funds. And what we found is that most companies are actually in steps 2 to 3. Most of them haven't even come close yet to 4 or 5. So we have actually a long way to go. And so, but we are seeing companies change and what's driving them to change. So I talked first about some of the societal changes. These are organizational changes that are happening. So the core values of the companies are changing. There's new leadership coming in. We're seeing a generational shift. So now we have a generation, which I'd say is probably my generation. I'm a Gen Xer, and Gen Xers are very kind of conflicted people, right? So we like to kind of make money, but we also feel a bit guilty, right, about some of the things that we're doing to the world, right? So we're trying to find a way to mitigate these. So you see companies like Google, for example, is a great company that's trying to do a lot around environment and around impact, but at the same time has a business model which sometimes maybe have challenges around different areas of sustainability. We're also seeing new opportunities. We're seeing opportunities to kind of make money in this space. That's also a big shift as well, right? Because as societies decarbonize, that creates a new opportunity for business and new opportunity for innovation. But there are some market factors as well. We see a lot of slowing growth in economies. So we have to look to new ways to kind of fast pace our growth. We can look to ways to transform our economies. Risk is a big factor. It's just getting riskier to not care about anything having to do with social or environmental factors for companies. And this is going to accelerate as we continue to deal with the climate crisis. Investor pressures, investors are starting to get more engaged. There's a pretty significant proportion of investors who are starting to move to more blended, not solely profit maximizing objectives. And this is having an impact on businesses. And we also see activist investors, right? Who are the ones who kind of in the middle of a shareholder meeting stand up and scream things. This is actually becoming a common occurrence, even in a country like Japan, where I live. Regulatory pressure, governments are starting to take action on this, particularly places like the EU. The US, obviously, we just passed the IRA in the US, regardless of kind of the outcomes of the election. This will continue this will transform in many ways how companies think about investment and about kind of their climate responsibilities. And then also changing consumer and customer preferences. This is really important. We have a significant proportion of the public, particularly younger people, who care about these things and who are saying, I don't need to buy that thing, or I want something that is recyclable, or I'm happy to shop in a vintage shop. And this is really starting to disrupt a lot of different economies. And so some of the things that we're seeing around climate change specifically is we're seeing attitude shifting. I think this top left-hand chart, if you can see it, is really interesting because it says to people who are potential employees, does a company's efforts towards tackling climate affect where you want to work? Now, this is obviously a mix of different age groups, but this is starting to accelerate. And I've spoken with several HR directors, and they're actually quite worried about that. Even in Japan, where people are a little bit farther behind on this topic, people are actually saying, yeah, I'd like to work at that company, but I actually care about what they're doing. So this is actually putting a lot of pressure, and particularly in markets that are increasingly struggling with finding good labor and good talent. This is becoming a factor. I talked about the regulatory environment. This is an interesting chart because it shows you the amount of acceleration in regulations around environment over the last 60 years. And actually this decade, we're probably going to see even more. So that's a really stark change. And then we're also seeing investors talk about prioritizing ESG. So I think this is not important to minimize that there's a big shift towards sustainable type investing. And some of it is greenwashing, but there is a significant proportion that is not. And it's that we're getting better at trying to push banks and push companies away from greenwashing activities and to move towards a framework where we probably will eventually start penalizing people for doing so. The EU is already adopting some of that legislation, but this is not a negligible shift in terms of how the money flows are changing. And so the tech sector specifically, you all are based certainly in and around one of the tech hubs, if not the tech hub of the world. And tech companies are actually under a lot of pressure to do things particularly around climate, and also I'd say around diversity, equity, inclusion as well. So if you look at what they're doing, first of all, they're getting their own houses in order. And they're dealing with things like security and privacy, which is a huge problem in the tech sector. 20 years ago, nobody thought about, especially the rise of social media, nobody thought about the problems that we have today. And a lot of that was because people weren't thinking about these issues and anticipating them ahead of time and taking certain different decisions that might have helped us avoid some of the fallout that we've had in the recent years around security and privacy in tech. DE&I, as I talked about, incredibly important thing. The race for global talent continues. Countries such as the United States or the UK or France are becoming much more diverse very quickly. So companies are really having to deal with, and this is a real material topic for companies in terms of talent management. It's difficult and expensive to find people. And so this is becoming increasingly important. Governance, tech companies notoriously, especially startups, have very bad governance, very, very bad governance, which has caused a lot of problems. And so this is something that's starting to change. Climate, of course, while they're often not the biggest emitters, tech companies, tech is a big contributor. And also tech has customers that are asking for climate data now so they can understand their footprint challenges. And I'll talk about that a little minute on the innovation side. And also supply chains. Certainly device companies, what happens to all the devices we have at the end of their life? How do we deal with that problem? Because it's a pretty significant one. So some of the things that they're doing, and you'll see just some quick screenshots here, are some of the things that tech companies are offering to help their companies that work with them. So whether it be AWS or it be Salesforce or Criteo, which is an ad tech company, or even Apple, trying to offer their customers better products, more sustainable products, helping them understand what their footprint looks like so they can report better on it to authorities or keep track of their carbon footprint and take action. This is an area where tech companies are seeing a lot of opportunity and they're starting to innovate. But I should also say there's a whole bunch of startups as well, which I'll show you in a minute, who are doing a lot around this. And then, of course, another thing that they're doing is really helping to support the development of the climate tech, in particular ecosystem, the sustainable tech ecosystem. And so this includes things like foundations, the Cisco Foundation doing a lot to invest in climate solutions, really trying to do things like SAP is doing around kind of building out platforms to help climate tech startups be able to access the tools that they need to grow. So the tech sector is doing a lot around this, but of course there's a lot more that can be done. And on the climate tech side of things, this is just a snapshot of the types of companies and the types of areas within climate tech where we're seeing a lot of innovation. So everything from food and agriculture, transportation, analytics and behavior, that's a huge one. It's hard to kind of change things without great data. Manufacturing, buildings, how we build in our infrastructure is also a huge contributor to the climate emergency. And certainly energy. We're seeing a lot of challenges around this at the moment, but renewable tech, we're seeing a shift in terms of shifting to renewables pretty much around the world, but we still also seeing in the short term a real need for energy issues, which is causing also a need for things like fracking and such like that in the short term. But the long-term trend is really moving towards renewables, and there's a lot of technology and development in that area. Even in the midst of, we're dealing with a new economic slowdown, it seems, but even in the midst of that, we're still seeing a lot of investment in climate tech, and this is only going to accelerate with the EU legislation and also the passing of the IRA bill, because what's going to happen is, in addition to investor money, we're also going to see more government money coming into these technologies. And what that means is when that happens, you get more startups coming in, and you also get more investors coming in as well. And there will also probably be more investor incentives. So just to say, this sector is really, really hot. It continues to grow, which is encouraging, and it's going to create more opportunities, certainly. We're also going to continue to see lots of game-changing sustainable innovation, and we're already seeing that already. There's just thousands upon thousands of startups working in all kinds of areas, developing really interesting things. But many of these technologies are not yet scaled. Okay, so things like carbon capture, which a lot of people believe is going to make a significant impact in terms of helping us deal with our carbon technology, is still extremely expensive, very nascent, and not really yet proven. But it's an important technology that people are going to invest in. Reducing pesticides in farming. Farming, as we know, is also a huge contributor to the climate challenges we deal with as well. But how can we automate it? How can we make that more efficient? How can we move away from chemicals, which also are not helpful as well? Dealing with food waste, as we see here, kind of the molecular detection of spoilage. Food waste, huge issue, and something that we're trying to address as well. And then, of course, can we use our energy sources in order to produce products, right? So solar power, converting carbon into vodka. Can we do something purposeful with carbon? That capturing it and also utilizing it to produce new products and goods. And however, it is important to say that it's not without problems. So we have lots of new innovations that are coming up in the last few years. I'm sure all of you know crypto is kind of an ongoing story and saga around sustainability. And there are actually many climate solutions that are using blockchain, and there's been a lot of kind of pushback about these technologies, particularly in the media, as to whether they're helping or hurting us. I'm of the mindset, and I'll show you in a second, that actually this is a problem, but I think it's a problem that we can address. Bitcoin is probably, and as you probably know, there's kind of two paradigms. There's proof of stake, proof of work in the crypto sector. And one of these is more problematic than the other. And so we don't actually have a situation where every single crypto technology or crypto token or crypto platform is problematic, but there are absolutely some elements of it that are. But in this sector, which is growing, the answer isn't really to stop the innovation. It's how can we come up with ways to address it, okay? So we see lots of organizations and initiatives, whether they be trying to focus, deploy crypto to dealing with, helping with actual climate challenges and moving towards a regenerative economy if we can. There's foundations, for example, that are looking to blockchain to kind of help farmers, for example, or subsistence farmers. We're seeing with the Lemonade Foundation that's aiming to do that. We have Marley Technologies, which I think is speaking with you already. I don't know if they have already, that are really trying to improve the way we do carbon credits and utilizing this technology to help provide more transparency into carbon reduction projects and also into the carbon offsetting sector, which has a lot of waste and a lot of problems, but utilizing this technology for those benefits. And then also Ethereum recently shifted to a new paradigm to proof of stake, which is less energy emitting, and really trying to, how can we come up with ways to help these technologies be less impactful or less negatively impactful for the client, and also continue to kind of help and innovate and grow. And then I talked earlier about business model shifts as well, and we talked about this a little bit too. It's important to note that we also need to change how we think about business in terms of the way business functions. And B corporations, which started in the US, are a model to try to, as I said, really evaluate companies based off these three things. Profit, they have to be profitable, but also they need to also think about people, and they also need to think about the planet. And so the B Corp certification is probably one of the most well-known and the fastest growing. These are just a few of the companies who are now B Corp certified companies. I think there's thousands now of them, and there's more and more every day. So I think the more we can have models like this, the more we can kind of move into a more positive direction in terms of actually making this sustainable future a reality. In terms of accelerating change, what are some of the things that we can do? And then I'm going to conclude with a few case examples, and then we'll do a little bit of an exercise. There's a few things that are important to keep in mind, and these are things I talk with companies about. The first thing is resourcing means equals commitment. And what does that mean? That means that you kind of put your money where your mouth is, right? Companies talk a lot, but they don't always invest as they should. So really encouraging them to hire people who are sustainability experts and who understand this field. And now we're getting more and more people who are coming out of schools today who are actually learning about this. When I was in school, I had one class that was focused on impact investing, and that was a seminar, and that was not full credit, right? But that's changing. Now we have people coming out who are really have expertise in this. So I think we're going to see more of those people being hired, and also investing in technologies or new things that are really going to help their organizations be more sustainable. Benchmarking, we encourage companies as well to really look at their sector and how they're doing versus their competitors. Companies are very comfortable with doing this for things like marketing or finance or even digital adoption, but they're very bad at looking at how they're doing on sustainability and moving towards more of a sustainable organization versus their peers. And this is starting to change, but this is something we encourage them to do. Next, companies have to get much more savvy and current on the regulatory landscape, because this is changing and this is a real risk for them if they don't actually understand what they're going to be required to do by law. But there's a lot of activity in this field, and regardless of who's in office, the trend is kind of in one direction. And that's mostly because the problem is so immense that the only way that it can be dealt with, one of the only key ways it can be dealt with, is through regulation. It's very difficult to get companies to move on their own. You need to have carrots and sticks, and regulation tends to be very good for that. Make or buy, this is something we have specifically for Japan in particular. American companies are a bit better at this, but often companies don't have the expertise or technologies internally to be able to do this. So they have to really look at, okay, what exists elsewhere? Should I buy maybe a company that kind of can help me make this transition, or who has products that I can integrate in my portfolio to help help us be more sustainable? Do I have the capabilities internally to develop technologies or new ways of working on my own? Should I hire people into? But this is a decision companies have to take very carefully, because oftentimes they, as I was saying before, they do not have the capability to do that. So they have to really be very choiceful about how they make this choice. And then lastly, digital transformation is really key to measurement and management. We have these two trends that that are kind of going on in parallel, and digital is obviously much more advanced, right? We've been doing this for 20 years now, especially in the US. They're pretty far along this path, but there's still a lot more to do. But we can't really get good at sustainability without good systems and without good technology, right? And ideally, one day there'll be even fewer people who need to be running around gathering sustainability data. Hopefully we'll have enough connection between the many devices that we have in the world and the many systems we have in the world, where we can get real-time data and analysis on what's going on. And then lastly, we always say, don't forget the S and the G. Companies are really focusing a lot around environment because that's really at the moment kind of the focus of many societies. But it is impossible to achieve what we want to achieve on the climate side of things without equality, without engagement of lots of different types of people and different ideas, without ensuring that we deal with human rights issues, or that companies have good governance, right? And have transparency around their information, their data, what they're saying, and making sure they're doing what they're saying, right? So we try to make sure companies don't lose sight of this. To close, I want to talk about a few examples, to give you examples of what this actually looks like in some companies that we think are doing a good job at this. The first one is called Schneider Electric, and what they do is they do kind of engineering services, they do energy management for companies, and they're considered one of the most sustainable companies in the world. They're part of something that's called, it's actually this, I think it's called Corporate Knights. It's a sustainability ranking that's done. It's a pretty good one, a pretty reputable one. It's a Canadian company that does this. And they achieved the #1 status on this last year. And there's some things that they're doing that are particularly important. First of all, what you see on the right-hand side is kind of their impact register, let's call it that. And what they actually do is they publish, along with their financial earnings, every quarter where they are on all of these objectives. So when they say things like grow our green revenues to 80%, that means that they need to change their product portfolio to address some aspect of climate change. That's not a small change, right, for a company to do. So what they do is they report out on this every quarter. They talk about what they're doing. And they've also shifted beyond this just being the sustainability department, right? So each initiative requires lots of different types of organization departments within the company to be involved. So for example, the grow the green revenues to 80%, that requires commercial and finance to be engaged, or delivering over 800 million tons of saved and avoided CO2 emissions. That avoids R&D, innovation, and commercial functions to be involved, for example. So they've moved, many companies still just manage these activities within the sustainability division, but that's starting to change, thank goodness. And another thing that's starting to change is that sustainability officers are now taking on other roles too. So what's happening is what they've chosen to do is they've basically chosen to make their chief sustainability officer also their chief strategy officer. And strategy for most companies is a really core function, right? That's the future of the company. That's what we do as a business. So I think that's an important signal in terms of bringing these two things together. Another thing that I think is really important is how can employees feel that they're involved in this, okay? Henkel, which is a consumer products company, makes a lot of the products on the right-hand side, was kind of early to this. They've been doing this from 2012, and their goal was really to make all of their staff sustainability ambassadors, okay? So they have 50,000 employees, and they've actually changed since 2016, 40,000 of these. And so what does that mean? That means that they identify ideas to be able to take to management and things that they should do. And this comes from the employees. This is really important because if you don't have engagement of all of your staff, you don't have the best ideas, you don't have the best, you often don't come up with the best innovations. So it's important this not be top down, that it also come bottom up. And so they identified packaging as a key area of focus and really tried to focus around ideas and getting this to be a priority for the company and get the company put some targets around this. And also they encouraged employees to go beyond the company and talk to people in their communities. And this means in their local communities, but also with their customers, because it's important to mention that companies are not just operating on their own, right? They are also a part of a system and they have the power to change systems. And so what they're trying to do is to encourage their employees to help bring about this change, even if it's just sharing what they're doing, even if it's just asking them what they're doing or sharing ideas. That's certainly better than nothing. And then the last example is Cisco. And I think this is a really good example of using the tools you have to try to help your employees take action, right? So they're a tech company, and what they do is they really try to get the employees in their green network to, they created this kind of Cisco green team network of the employees to utilize technology and to utilize WebEx and to utilize ways of, WebEx spaces or interactive spaces for people to share ideas around circular economy and things that they can do and things they can take to their customers, and also collaborating on topics and initiatives to extend ideas to their partners and their customers and communities. They also have, which I think is also really interesting and important, a Recycle IT Day, where they really try to encourage employees to bring in their old devices. Technical devices are an extreme problem in many ways, particularly from a supply chain perspective, not just from a climate and environmental perspective, but also from a human rights perspective. The kind of mining of the minerals and things that we need to create devices is very depletive to the environment and also has a lot of human rights issues. So can we recycle these? Can we repurpose them? How should we be using them differently? And I think as a tech company, it's good that they kind of do things that align very much with what they do. Okay. So that's all for me as the kind of download part. And what I want to do, I think we're 9 and maybe 6. What I'd like to do is I'd like to do a little bit of an exercise. Okay. And this is called the How Sustainable Is This exercise. And I'm going to read through this quickly. And if maybe you can choose the one you would like to work on. And then I'll just call on you and you give me your thoughts. Okay. And so what I'd like to do, I'm going to show you a few products or business models. And I want to hear from you is not so much how circular this is. You can talk about circularity, but let's say how sustainable is this and why on a scale of 0 to 10. Okay. Quite simply. And then secondly, what are kind of one or two ideas that you might have to improve the sustainability of this product or service? Okay. And there's 3 examples I'm going to give. Choose whichever one you like. We're going to have 5 minutes to do this. The first one is the Adidas shoe, which is basically, you've probably seen this Adidas sneaker. I think it came out 2017. And it's basically a sneaker that's a running shoe that's basically developed from recycled plastic waste. And they've sold a lot of these. So in 2018 alone, they sold more than 5,000 pairs. They sold 11 million in 2019. I don't have more current figures, but they've probably sold a lot more of these. And so that's the first example is the kind of running shoe. So again, how sustainable is this on a scale of 1 to 10? The second is Zara's clothes collection campaign. So they have in all their stores, they have these bins, you bring back your old clothes, they take them, they claim to recycling them. And it was launched in 2015. To date, more than 34,000 tons have been collected. All the stores should be now, I developed this example last year. So I think now probably all of the examples have been, all their stores have been fitted with these bins. And their commitment is to either collect, to reuse, recycle, or donate to charity all the items that they collect. And then the last one is IKEA, which is a similar model, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to get all of their products to be 100% circular from the beginning, which is actually, I should say this is a real ambition because when I was going to school many years ago, IKEA was terrible. So I think it's actually gotten better, but it doesn't mean they don't have a little ways to go. But that's what their ambition. And so what they've started to do is open secondhand stores within their stores. And so they've started in their home market of Sweden. And the goods are sold will come from recycling centers where furniture is donated or repaired or repurposed. So they'll have actually section in the store where you can actually buy circular or reused products. And you might see this in the US. This might have started in the US yet. I'm not sure. But so those are our 3 examples. So I'd love you if you could take 5 minutes and tell me on this, pause, just jot it down on your notes. You don't have to jot it in the chat and we'll just have a discussion for each of these examples and we'll discuss how sustainable is it and then hear an idea, 1 or 2 ideas from you about how it could be improved if you don't think it's very sustainable. Okay, so 5 minutes and then we'll finish with questions.
Trista,
Yeah.
I have a quick question on
Sure.
IKEA. So
Yeah.
the second-hand products, is that just IKEA products?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure though, but that's a good question. That's a great question. And maybe people want to think about that when they're right? Because Zara clothing stores, they take all types of stuff. So
Right.
here Uniqlo does the same. And they take any type of clothes you bring back. They don't have to be Uniqlo clothes. About 4 more minutes. See everyone. time moves slowly when you're waiting, but somehow it moves quickly when your kids are growing up. I don't understand.
I feel like we should have music in the interlude.
I know. I should have given music, but I figure people probably want to think. So give it another couple minutes. One more minute. Okay, I think we're ready to discuss. Is everybody ready? Does anybody need more time? Good, go? Okay, good to go. Let me see if I can back up here. Okay, who did Adidas? Anybody do Adidas? Nobody likes sneakers. And wants to share? Well, I'll talk about this first, and then we'll go to the other examples, and then I'll call on you. I think this is a really interesting one, right? Because we see increasing numbers of products that are made with recyclable materials, right? Often plastic. And so, but there's a few questions that are really important to think about, and people who are developing sustainable fashion are often thinking about these problems. So the first thing is, how much of this shoe is recyclable, right? And actually, the problem with this shoe is that there's some things that are really difficult to make in a recyclable manner. The soles, for example, those can be very difficult to make. And I think they're made kind of with a foam. So at first, as I understand, the upper part was recyclable. So the fabrics, the laces, some of these eyelets, they opted not to use metal eyelets, as you'll see in these shoes, because metal eyelets are actually very difficult to recycle, apparently. Which is probably something to do with their size. And so that's the first issue, is how much of this shoe is actually recyclable, right? Can we reuse? The second is, how many times can you actually recycle it? So in circular economy, there's this concept of loops. How many loops does a product go through? And the goal is to have infinite loops. But oftentimes, many products actually break down after being reused too many times. Plastic bottles are that way, for example. You can only actually recycle with that plastic and use it so many times. It's not infinitely recyclable. That's a question also, is how many times is it recyclable? And I think one of the things that's also the third question that I would ask is, what's the objective here? Because I think there's this question of how often should you be buying running shoes? Are these durable? Do they hold up? That's actually a huge problem with running shoes. If you run, I used to run a lot. I don't run as much these days, but I think they only get a certain amount of mileage on them before they just don't function properly anymore. So there's also an important design question around, how do we design things to last, right, in sustainability? And this is a really good example of those three points. Okay. Any questions or comments on this one? We'll move on to Zara. No? Okay. Anybody did Zara? Yes. So we have Ankita and we have Anjika. Do you want to go off mic and share? Go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll start by pointing some things out. And for when including like these recycling bins in stores, number one, it's not transparent enough about what happens to the clothes after it's collected. And number two, it also kind of gives us a sense of customers that they can just keep buying the same amount of clothes and still have a place where it can easily be thrown away. So we think in order to make this more sustainable, it'd be better for Zara to instead focus on producing less in the first place, and to also increase their transparency on, and this includes on like the type of fabrics they're used, what type of labor was used to make this clothing. And so if they can focus more on bettering these more proactive aspects rather than like an end of life, which is bringing the clothes back in, that could further Zara so much more in their sustainable goals. Yeah, a big part of it is that it's a fast fashion company, and the overall rate of clothes is not being addressed through the recycling bin.
Absolutely.
Everything.
That's absolutely. So you highlighted two important things there. One, the business model and the fast fashion business model, which is a profound problem, and it's actually, for our book, we interviewed one of the kind of leading brands and H&M, and because it's an very interesting problem that they're facing, because as the earth continues to warm, it's going to get harder to grow things. And one of the things that's going to get harder to grow is cotton.
Mhm.
And that creates a profound problem for them. So they're kind of creating their own problem in some ways, right? So they're creating a waste problem, but also this kind of overconsumption, certain idea is kind of hastening the climate change issue, right? And kind of hastening the warming of the climate in some ways. But they also know there's an end game where they might not actually even get the materials to produce enough clothing, right, to even maintain this model, right? So even if you put aside the kind of the moral, I guess, correctness of this model in the first place, it's actually a model that's not sustainable in the long term anyway. That's kind of the funny part of fast fashion. And then the second thing is, very good point about what happens to the clothes when you recycle them. And there's some studies that have been done, and actually of these recycling programs, something like, the last statistic I saw, was like 60% of what's collected actually goes to landfill.
Mhm.
So if you see these pictures from, West African countries, and you see children running through fields with just piles of clothing. There's almost more clothing than anyone knows what to do with. So absolutely, the first step is, using better fabrics, changing the model, getting people to use less. And in some ways, luxury companies are a little bit better off in this regard, because they already have a model that's based on scarcity, or at least it should be, right? Even though there's a question around whether we need that stuff at all. But in any event, that model is probably a more sustainable one. But yes, absolutely, spot on your commentary on this one. Great, thank you. Okay, then last one is IKEA or IKEA, depending on how you pronounce it. Anyone do this one? Oh, Antea? I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name properly. Can you take yourself off mute? Perfect, go ahead.
Alright. I think this was one of the most sustainable, like personally, because it's pretty circular. Like the furniture, it's repaired or reused and resold. So like there's minimal adjustments to it, which would cost less energy. Like the energy would only be spent on like transporting the furniture to IKEA or the repairments. So I think it's like much more circular compared to like Zara and like the Adidas shoe. And thus I think I like ranked it like pretty high on the like sustainability scale.
Great, absolutely. So I think there's a really good, I like that you talked about the energy right? And the trend, because that is always going to be a factor, right? But I think over time, as we move towards more electric vehicles and our electric grids move more towards renewables, then you really will minimize that piece over time. That will take time to happen, but I think that will be minimized. But yes, I think that the fact that they are kind of saying, maybe we don't need to sell as much furniture and maybe we need to resell and get repurpose and fix and repair things again. I think that's encouraging. You know, companies have basically been building stuff to end it to reach its end of life as quickly as humanly possible. Even even the devices we use, you know, become obsolete pretty quickly. You know, the fact that a computer becomes obsolete within 5 years is kind of crazy. And we don't upgrade them anymore. We just kind of get new computers, right? And I think the fact that IKEA is saying, well, maybe we need to kind of look at our model and support more of this kind of, you know, we'll call it vintage furniture sales. Maybe we need to shift more of our business model towards that, as I think is an encouraging development. Absolutely. So thanks so much for your observations and your ideas. I think you caught all the main points that I wanted to share. I know we started a bit late on Berkeley time, so we have a few minutes if there's any questions that anyone has. Perhaps I answered them all.
So Trista, there's a few things that came in the chat as well
Oh,
about
yeah, sure.
exercise.
Yeah, so let me see. Okay, so let's go back to so I think Priya said Sarah's collection. What's good is that it initiates the beginning of the thought in the consumer about sustainability. Yes, that's a good point. Reuse and consumer waste. Also, some of the clothing probably is recycled or donated. However, it promotes continuous consumption, exactly as we said before. Not very sure about what the plan goes. Exactly, very good point, Priya. And the articles you've read about how donate centers are often filled with clothing. Clothing is shipped overseas and dropped in piles and piles of clothing. One last point is that usually donating involves a discount in the store, which once again promotes further consumption. That's a good point, right? Bring our clothes back, we give you a discount, and then you just buy more. That's a little bit of a strange. I understand the kind of the spirit of it, but it is a bit of a strange thing. But it's a good point about the awareness of the consumer, and that, you know, it is companies' responsibility to also educate consumers about this as well, and to if they want consumers to care about sustainability, they need to also communicate that to consumers. And also, companies are very good at getting us to buy stuff that we don't really need, so they are very good marketers. So we can definitely, they can definitely advocate for this as well. One second thoughts on the chat. I had to run. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. And it's an ongoing cycle more than that it is a circular economy, in my opinion. Education's awareness is key. Absolutely. Yep. So yeah, I think the thing that's important to note is that this is going to be a long journey. Unfortunately, we don't have lots of time, right? It seems that climate change that we're dealing with is accelerating even more quickly than we had anticipated. But what we have to do is try to move as quickly as we can, but it's going to take time. It's really changing our entire way of producing, manufacturing, marketing, and everything, right? So yeah, absolutely. Oh, Anthea, you have a question? Go ahead, take yourself off mute.
I was just gonna ask about like future contact, like if we wanted to ask you questions.
So you can contact me here, .jp. I put it in the chat. Anytime, feel free. If you have questions.
Thank you for this talk.
Thank you, and I hope all of you will, and I'm sure all of you will actually work around the sustainability topic in your jobs, because that's kind of the way things are going. So, you know, ideas and energy, please bring in, you know, whatever you can into this sector, because we need people with great ideas and energy to kind of really help to kind of change the way our societies and our companies work. There's a lot to do. But thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to come speak. It's been a delight speaking with everyone today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trista. It was
Thank
really
you.
great to have you today. Thank you everybody for staying. I know we're a little bit over time, but thank you so much for being here and for asking questions and listening. Really appreciate you being here, Trista, and telling everybody about sustainability in business and all of the interactive exercises you planned. Everybody, I dropped the link to register if you haven't already. For the climate challenge, it closes tonight at 11:59 p.m. So if you haven't registered, please do so. And we will have another speaker event next week, Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. So please keep an eye out for that. I'll be sending out emails and Slack messages. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Trista.
Enjoy your sweets, Jen. Have some extra.
I
for me.
will. Thank you.